When tech genius Caleb Dawson lost everything in Silicon Valley, he thought his career was over. Now he fixes computers from his garage while raising his autistic son Jude alone. Most people see only the boy's challenges, but Caleb knows better. Jude communicates through code and patterns like a digital savant. On a stormy Tuesday night, Caleb gets an emergency call. Vivienne Crest's cybersecurity empire is crashing hours before their biggest product launch ever. Her ruthless reputation precedes her, but desperation makes strange bedfellows. When Caleb arrives with Jude in tow, the corporate staff exchange glances, but there's no choice. As Caleb dives into the digital wreckage, something extraordinary happens. Jude wanders the office and spots what everyone else missed, a hidden pattern buried deep in the error logs. The solution unfolds through father and son working as one mind. But what happens next will change everything Vivienne thought she knew about success, family, and what really matters. What could make a CEO known for crushing competitors break down in tears over a single father and his remarkable son?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds of the small apartment, casting geometric shadows across the hardwood floor. Caleb Dawson stood at the kitchen counter, methodically preparing 2 bowls of oatmeal, one plain, one with exactly 7 blueberries arranged in a perfect circle. Routine mattered in their house. Routine was the invisible scaffolding that held their world together. "Good morning, buddy," Caleb said softly, though he knew Jude had been awake for at least an hour. The 8-year-old sat cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by notebooks filled with intricate drawings that looked like circuit diagrams crossed with abstract art. To most people, they resembled the doodles of a distracted child. To Caleb, they were windows into a mind that processed the world in ways he was still learning to understand. Jude looked up from his current creation, a spiral pattern of interconnected nodes that seemed to pulse with invisible energy. His dark eyes, so much like his mother's, met his father's briefly before returning to the page. Communication without words had become their native language. The apartment bore the comfortable wear of a home, built on love rather than luxury. Hand-me-down furniture mixed with carefully chosen pieces that served specific purposes. The couch faced away from the street-facing window because sudden movements outside could overwhelm Jude's senses. The kitchen was organized with mathematical precision, every item in its designated place. Even the books on the shelves were arranged by height and color, a system Jude had implemented when he was 6, and which Caleb had never dared disturb. 5 years ago, this wasn't the life Caleb had imagined for himself. 5 years ago, he had been Marcus Reed's business partner in one of Silicon Valley's most promising cybersecurity startups. Their company, Sentinel Systems, had been on the verge of a breakthrough that would have revolutionized digital security protocols. Caleb had been the technical genius behind their innovations, while Marcus handled the business side with his natural charisma and aggressive networking skills. They had met in graduate school at Stanford, 2 ambitious young men who shared a vision of making the digital world safer. Marcus came from old money. His family owned a chain of luxury hotels, but he had wanted to prove himself in tech. Caleb, the son of a high school math teacher and a librarian from Oregon, had earned his way there through scholarships and 16-hour days. Their partnership had seemed perfect. Marcus's connections and Caleb's brilliance. The betrayal, when it came, had been swift and surgical. A key investor meeting where Marcus presented Caleb's work as his own. Legal documents that had been subtly altered to dilute Caleb's ownership. A campaign of whispered doubts about Caleb's stability, his ability to handle the pressure of rapid growth, his fitness to be a public face for the company. When Sarah, Jude's mother, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 32, Marcus had used Caleb's distraction and desperation against him. The final blow had come during Sarah's last lucid month. Marcus had offered to buy out Caleb's stake in the company, a fraction of its true value, presented as a generous gesture to help with medical bills. Caleb had refused, and Marcus had made his move. A hostile takeover disguised as a necessary restructuring. Caleb had found himself locked out of his own company, his innovations absorbed into Marcus's empire. his reputation systematically destroyed through carefully planted stories about his emotional instability and erratic behavior. Sarah had died 6 months later, leaving Caleb with a grieving 5-year-old son who spoke in code and saw patterns where others saw chaos. The life insurance had been enough to cover the medical debts and provide a modest cushion, but Caleb's career in corporate tech was over. No one would hire the unstable genius who had supposedly lost his edge, so he had reinvented himself. Dawson. Tech repair operated out of the converted garage behind their apartment building. He fixed laptops for college students, recovered data from crashed hard drives, and debugged small business networks. The work was honest, if not particularly challenging, and it allowed him to be present for Jude in ways that his previous 70-hour weeks never would have. Jude appeared in the kitchen doorway, his notebook clutched against his chest like a shield. He had dressed himself in his preferred uniform, khaki pants, a blue polo shirt, and sneakers with Velcro straps. Shoelaces were an unnecessary variable. In his carefully ordered world, new pattern today? Caleb asked, gesturing toward the notebook. Jude opened it to reveal yesterday's work. The drawing showed a network of interconnected circles, each containing smaller symbols that resembled a hybrid of mathematical equations and ancient runes. Caleb had learned to read these visual languages over the years. This particular pattern suggested flow and connection, but with areas of disruption marked in darker strokes. Interesting, Caleb murmured, studying the design. Looks like you're thinking about systems that need repair. Jude's slight smile was answer enough. The boy had an intuitive understanding of complex systems that never ceased to amaze his father. While other children his age struggled with multiplication tables, Jude could visualize data flows and identify inefficiencies in network architectures. His drawings weren't random, they were maps of digital landscapes that existed in his mind. The morning routine continued with familiar precision. Breakfast was consumed in comfortable silence, with Jude occasionally pointing to specific elements. In his drawings and Caleb offering gentle observations. They moved through the apartment like dancers who had rehearsed their steps for years, each anticipating the other's needs. Mrs. Chun, from the apartment next door, knocked on the door at exactly 8:15, as she had every weekday for the past 2 years. A retired teacher with infinite patience and a grandmother's intuitive understanding of special needs, she had become Jude's daytime companion when Caleb had to work on-site jobs. "Good morning, Jude," she said in her soft voice, setting down. "A thermos of jasmine tea. I brought new graph paper today, the kind with smaller squares." Jude's eyes lit up the closest thing to visible excitement he typically displayed. The smaller squares would allow for more intricate patterns, more detailed representations of the digital worlds he carried in his head. Caleb gathered his tools and prepared for the day ahead. His work van, a reliable if battered Honda Pilot, contained everything he needed to diagnose and repair most common computer problems. The back was organized with the same precision as their kitchen, every cable and diagnostic tool in its designated place. Jude had helped design the organization system, turning equipment storage into a visual algorithm that maximized efficiency. The neighborhood around their apartment building was a study in gentle transition. Older residents who had lived there for decades shared sidewalks with young families drawn by affordable rent in proximity to the city's growing tech corridor. Caleb knew his neighbors by name and habit, the couple who jogged past every morning at 7:30, the woman who walked 3 small dogs while checking her phone, the elderly man who tended a small garden behind the building with the devotion of a medieval monk. This was their world now, smaller and quieter than the one Caleb had once inhabited, but rich with genuine connections and daily rhythms that provided stability for both father and son. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was a life built on honesty and presence. Every morning, as he watched Jude work on his patterns, Caleb felt a deep gratitude for the unexpected gift of seeing the world through his son's extraordinary eyes. The phone rang as Caleb was loading his final equipment into the van. Routine service calls usually came in the form of texts or emails, so the urgency of a voice call immediately caught his attention. He almost didn't answer emergency calls, often meant difficult customers and unreasonable expectations. But something about the persistent ringing suggested genuine desperation. And Caleb had never been able to ignore someone in real need. He answered on the fourth ring, and his quiet morning was about to become something else entirely. Dawson Tech Repair, this is Caleb. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and barely containing panic. Mr. Dawson, this is Janet Mills from Crest Cybersecurity. We have a critical system failure, and we need someone here immediately. I was given your number by Tom Harrison at Dataflow Solutions. Caleb knew Tom, a good man, who ran a small business network installation company. They'd worked together on a few projects over the years, and Tom wouldn't have given out his number lightly, especially not to a company like Crest Cybersecurity. What kind of failure are we talking about? Caleb asked, already mentally calculating the drive time to the corporate district. Complete system crash. Our entire network is down 6 hours before our biggest product launch. Ms. Crest is... Janet paused, and Caleb could hear the careful selection of words. She's highly motivated to resolve this quickly. Vivienne Crest, even in his smaller world. Of local tech repair, Caleb knew that name. The Iron Lady of cybersecurity, they called her. Someone who had built her company through sheer will and an intolerance for failure that bordered on legendary. The kind of CEO who fired people for missing deadlines and crushed competitors without a second thought. I'll need to bring my son, Caleb said, watching through the window as Jude showed Mrs. Chun his latest drawing. He's 8, and I don't have alternative childcare on short notice. The silence stretched long enough that Caleb thought the call might have dropped. Mr. Dawson, this is a high-security corporate environment. We can't. Then you'll need to find someone else, Caleb interrupted gently. I don't abandon my son for any job, regardless of the circumstances. Another pause, this one filled with the sound of muffled conversation. Janet returned with barely. Concealed desperation. Miss Crest says to bring him, but he'll need to stay close to you at all times. We'll have someone escort you both throughout the building. Caleb looked at his watch. Nearly 9 o'clock, and if this was as serious as Janet suggested, he'd be there most of the day. Possibly into the evening. Mrs. Chun could handle Jude for a few hours, but not indefinitely, and bringing him to a corporate environment would be challenging for both of them. I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said, and I'll need your address. After hanging up, Caleb stood in his kitchen, weighing the decision. The money would be good emergency corporate calls, paid 5 times his normal rate. But disrupting Jude's routine, bringing him into an unfamiliar environment filled with strangers and unpredictable noise levels, was risky. He found Jude and Mrs. Chun at the small table in the living room, both studying the morning's drawing with serious concentration. Buddy, I got a call for a big job today. It might take a while, and I'd need you to come with me. It's going to be in a big office building with lots of people. Jude looked up from his notebook, processing this information. New environments were challenging, but he had learned to adapt when his father explained things clearly and gave him time to prepare mentally. Can I bring my notebook? Jude asked, his voice soft but clear. Of course. And your headphones, in case it gets too loud. Mrs. Chun smiled and patted Jude's hand. Perhaps this will give you new patterns to draw. The drive to Crest Cybersecurity took them through the heart of the city's business district, past gleaming towers of glass and steel that housed the fortunes of the digital age. Caleb hadn't been in this part of town for years, and the familiar sight of corporate logos and suited executives rushing along sidewalks brought back memories he tried to bury. Crest Cybersecurity occupied the top 15 floors of a 40-story building, its name displayed in understated silver letters that somehow managed to convey both elegance and menace. The lobby was all marble and indirect lighting, with a security desk that looked like it belonged in a government facility. Jude stayed close to his father as they approached the security checkpoint, his notebook clutched tightly and his head slightly tilted to avoid the harsh fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished surfaces. The noise of the lobby clicking heels, elevator chimes, muted conversations created a sensory soup that Caleb could see his son struggling to process. Mr. Dawson? A woman in her 30s approached them, her expression carefully neutral. I'm Janet Mills. We spoke on the phone. And this must be Jude. She extended her hand toward Jude, who looked at it with polite confusion. Physical contact with strangers wasn't something he navigated easily. He's not comfortable with handshakes, Caleb explained quietly, but he appreciates the gesture. Janet withdrew her hand without apparent offense. Of course. Let me get you both visitor badges, and we'll head upstairs. Ms. Crest is waiting in the server room. The elevator ride to the 37th floor was mercifully quiet, but Caleb could feel the tension building in his son. Jude's breathing had become slightly more rapid, and he was pressing his notebook against his chest, a self-soothing behavior that usually preceded sensory overload. You okay, buddy? Caleb asked softly. Jude nodded, but his eyes were already cataloging every detail of their surroundings. The elevator buttons, the pattern of the carpet, the way the floor indicator lights moved in sequence. His mind was working. To find order in the chaos of new stimuli, the executive floor of Crest Cybersecurity was a study in controlled intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the city, while the interior design favored sharp angles and cold colors that suggested efficiency over comfort. Employees moved through the space with the urgent purposefulness of people who knew their jobs depended on results. The server room is this way, Janet said, leading them down a corridor lined with conference rooms, where serious-looking people huddled over laptops and tablets. Ms. Crest has been there since 4 this morning. As they approached the server room, Caleb could hear raised voices through the heavy door. The tone was unmistakably that of a person in command, facing a crisis that threatened to spiral beyond. Control, don't want to hear about what should have worked. I want to hear about what we're going to do in the next 6 hours to save this company. The voice was female, sharp with authority and barely restrained frustration. Vivienne Crest, speaking to what sounded like a room full of very worried people. Janet knocked and entered without waiting for a response. Miss Crest, Mr. Dawson is here. The server room was larger than Caleb had expected, filled with rows of humming equipment that cast everything in a blue-tinged glow. The temperature was noticeably cooler than the rest of the building, and the constant white noise of cooling fans created oddly soothing backdrop. Vivienne Crest stood at the center of it all, and Caleb understood immediately why she had earned her reputation. She was tall, probably in her mid-40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a style that suggested she had no time for vanity. Her suit was expensive but practical, and her presence commanded the room in a way that had nothing to do with her position and everything to do with her inherent force of will. She turned to face them, and Caleb saw eyes that were both intelligent and desperate. This wasn't just a business crisis, this was personal. Mr. Dawson, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Caleb shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way her gaze immediately shifted to assess Jude. To her credit, she didn't show any visible reaction to his son's presence, though Caleb caught the slight tightening around her eyes. This is my son, Jude, Caleb said. He'll stay close and won't interfere with your work. Of course, Vivienne replied, though her tone suggested she was already calculating the complications this might create. Let me show you what we're dealing with. She led them to a bank of monitors that displayed what could only be described as digital chaos. Error messages cascaded across screens. System diagnostics showed critical failures in multiple subsystems, and progress bars hung frozen at various stages of incomplete processes. Our entire network infrastructure crashed at 3:47 this morning, Vivienne explained, her voice steady despite the obvious magnitude of the disaster. Everything servers, databases, security protocols, communication systems. 6 hours before we launch our biggest product ever. Caleb studied the displays, his mind automatically beginning to trace potential failure points and recovery strategies. This wasn't a random crash. The pattern of failures suggested something more systematic. How many people have worked on this since it happened? He asked. My entire IT team, plus consultants from 3 different firms, Vivienne replied. No. One can even identify the root cause, let alone fix it. Jude had been quietly observing the room, taking in the complex array of blinking lights and digital displays. Now he moved closer to one of the monitors, his notebook still pressed against his chest, but his attention focused on the patterns scrolling across the screen. What kind of launch is scheduled for this morning? Caleb asked, already suspecting. The answer would complicate everything. Guardian Protocol, Vivienne said, and Caleb recognized the name. It had been making headlines in the tech press for months. A revolutionary cybersecurity system that promised to make digital infrastructure virtually impenetrable. We have demonstrations scheduled for representatives from 15 major corporations and 3 government agencies. The contracts we're expecting to sign today are worth more than our entire company's current valuation. The stakes were enormous. A failure of this magnitude wouldn't just cost money. It would destroy credibility in an industry where trust was the only currency that mattered. I'll need to start with a complete diagnostic, Caleb said. But I have to tell you, this doesn't look like a random failure. The pattern suggests deliberate sabotage. Vivienne's expression didn't change, but Caleb caught the slight stiffening of her shoulders. That's impossible. Our security protocols are impenetrable. With respect, Miss Crest, I'm looking at evidence that suggests someone got through them. As if summoned by their conversation, a man in his 30s appeared in the doorway. He was tall and lean, with a kind of expensive haircut and designer. Glasses that suggested both technical competence and social ambition. Any progress? He asked, his tone carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being consulted on important decisions. David, this is Mr. Dawson, Vivienne said. He's going to help us diagnose the problem. Mr. Dawson, this is David Chun, my Chief Technology Officer. David approached with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted his welcome in any room. He extended his hand to Caleb with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Pleasure to meet you, David said. Though I have to say, we've already had our best people working on this for hours. I'm not sure what a local repair service can offer that we haven't already tried. The dismissal was polite, but unmistakable. Caleb had encountered this attitude countless times over the past 5 years. The assumption that anyone working outside the corporate sphere must be somehow inferior to those within it. Sometimes fresh eyes see things that familiarity misses, Caleb replied mildly. David's smile became slightly more strained. Of course. Well, I'll leave you to it. Ms. Crest, if you need me, I'll be coordinating with the client services team. As David left, Caleb noticed Jude had moved even closer to the main diagnostic display. The boy was studying the scrolling. Error messages with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something others had missed. Jude? Caleb said softly. What are you looking at? Instead of answering verbally, Jude opened his notebook and began sketching rapidly. His pencil moved across the page with surprising precision, creating a pattern that seemed to mirror the chaos on the screen, but with an underlying structure that hadn't been visible before. Vivienne watched this display with growing fascination. What is he drawing? He sees patterns, Caleb explained. Ways that complex systems connect and flow. He's mapping what he observes. As Jude continued to sketch, Caleb began his own diagnostic process. He connected his laptop to the network and started running trace programs, looking for the digital fingerprints. That would reveal how the attack had been executed. What he found made his blood run cold. Buried deep in the system logs, hidden beneath layers of legitimate traffic and routine operations, was a signature. He recognized a particular style of code injection that was as distinctive as a fingerprint. He had seen it before, years ago, when he and Marcus Reed had been developing advanced penetration testing tools for Sentinel systems. This wasn't just sabotage. This was personal, and somehow Marcus Reed had found a way to reach across 5 years of separation to destroying not just Caleb's life, but the life of anyone who dared to trust him with their most critical systems. Caleb stared at the screen, his hands frozen over the keyboard as the familiar code structure mocked him from the depths of Crest's compromised systems. The phantom code fragment was like finding his own signature at a crime scene unmistakable. Damning and impossible to explain without revealing a past he tried to bury. Mr. Dawson? Vivienne's voice cut through his paralysis. Have you found something? He forced himself to breathe, to think like the professional he'd once been, instead of the wounded man he'd become. I need to set up a proper workspace, he said, buying time while his mind raced. Somewhere I can spread out my equipment and work without interruption. Vivienne gestured toward a glass-walled conference room adjacent to the server area. Will that work? I can have it cleared immediately. As she spoke to Janet about clearing the room, Caleb watched Jude continue his sketching. A boy had moved to a different monitor now, one displaying network traffic patterns, and his drawing was evolving into something that looked less like abstract art and more like a map of hidden pathways. The conference room was sterile and corporate, with a polished table that could seat 12 and windows, offering a commanding view of the city below. Caleb began setting up his diagnostic equipment, while Jude found a corner where he could sit cross-legged with his notebook, safely away from the bustle, but still within sight of his father. Can you tell me exactly what happened this morning? Caleb asked as Vivienne settled into a chair across from him. The sequence of events, who was in the building, any unusual activity in the days leading up to the crash. Vivienne's expression grew thoughtful. I was here late last night, reviewing the final presentation materials for today's launch. The system was running perfectly at 11 p.m. when I left. David was still here. He often works late, an hour. Security team confirmed everything was normal during their midnight rounds. Who has administrative access to your core systems? Myself, David, and our head of security, Patricia Williams, plus 3 senior developers, but they're all people who've been with the company for years. Caleb connected his laptop to their network through a secure tunnel, isolating his access point to prevent any potential contamination. As his diagnostic programs began their deep scan, he found himself wrestling with the implications of what he'd discovered. Marcus Reed's signature in the malicious code wasn't just a coincidence, it was a message. A declaration that no matter how far Caleb had fallen, how completely he'd been erased from the corporate world, Marcus could still reach him, could still destroy anyone who trusted him. Mr. Dawson, Vivienne said, studying his expression with the sharp attention of someone accustomed to reading people's faces for advantage. You look like you've seen a ghost. The irony of her words wasn't lost on him. Marcus Reed was exactly that, a ghost from a past that refused to stay buried. The attack on your system, Caleb said carefully. It's sophisticated. Whoever did this had intimate knowledge of your infrastructure and months to plan the assault. That's what David said. He thinks it might be corporate espionage, one of our competitors trying to sabotage the Guardian Protocol launch. A movement in the corner caught Caleb's attention. Jude had abandoned his notebook and was standing at the window, his hands pressed against the glass as he stared down at the street below. This wasn't his usual pattern-seeking behavior. Something had unsettled him. Jude? What's wrong, buddy? The boy turned from the window, his face showing the careful blankness he wore when processing overwhelming information. He pointed back toward the server room, then made a gesture that Caleb had learned to interpret as broken pattern. He's saying something's wrong with the system architecture itself, Caleb translated. Not just the attack, but something fundamental about how it's designed. Vivienne raised an eyebrow. An 8-year-old can assess our network infrastructure? He sees things differently, Caleb replied, already moving toward Jude. His mind processes complex systems as visual patterns. If he's saying something's broken at a fundamental level. His laptop chimed with the completion of the initial diagnostic scan. The results confirmed his worst fears and added new ones. The attack wasn't just sophisticated, it was surgical. Whoever had done this knew not just Crest systems, but the specific vulnerabilities that would cause maximum damage while leaving minimal forensic evidence. But more troubling was what Jude had apparently sensed. The network architecture itself showed signs of long-term manipulation. Not just the recent attack, but months of subtle modifications that had weakened the system's defenses from within. Ms. Crest, Caleb said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Has anyone left your company recently? Anyone with high-level access who might have felt overlooked or undervalued? Vivienne's expression hardened. Our retention rate is excellent. We pay top salaries and offer equity packages that... That's not what I'm asking, Caleb interrupted gently. I'm asking about someone who might have felt passed over for promotion or excluded from important decisions. Someone with the technical skills to plan something like this. The silence stretched between them, and Caleb could see Vivienne's mental wheels turning. In the corner, Jude had returned to his notebook, but his sketching had become more urgent, more focused. There have been some personality conflicts, Vivienne admitted. David has been with the company for 3 years, and he's exceptionally talented. But there have been tensions with other team members. Some people feel his management style is too aggressive. Anyone in particular? Sarah Kim, one of our senior developers. She left 6 months ago after a disagreement with David about project priorities. And there was some friction between David and Marcus. She stopped abruptly, her face paling. Caleb's blood turned to ice. Marcus? Marcus Reed. He consulted for us briefly last year, helping design some of our security protocols. David brought him in. They had worked together before, apparently. But I didn't like his approach, too flashy and theoretical. I terminated the contract after 2 months. The room seemed to tilt around Caleb. Marcus hadn't just attacked Crest systems. He had been inside them, had studied them, mapped them, identified their weaknesses while being paid to strengthen them. And David Shun, Vivienne's trusted CTO, had been the one to bring him in. Miss Crest, Caleb said, his voice carefully controlled, I need you to tell me everything about Marcus Reed's time here. Every system he accessed, every person he worked with, every recommendation he made. Vivienne was studying Caleb's face with growing alarm. You know him. It wasn't a question. In his years of building her company, Vivienne Crest had learned to read the subtle tells that revealed when someone was hiding something important. We have a history, Caleb admitted, a complicated one. What kind of history? Before Caleb could answer, Jude appeared at his elbow, holding out his notebook. The latest drawing was unlike anything the boy had created before, a complex network diagram that showed not just current system architecture, but layers of hidden connections that seemed to pulse with malevolent purpose. He's mapped the attack vectors, Caleb said, studying his son's work with growing amazement. Jude, this is incredible. How did you see all this? Jude pointed to specific elements in his drawing, then back toward the server room. His meaning was clear. The patterns he'd observed in the error, messages and network traffic had revealed the underlying structure of the sabotage. Mr. Dawson, Vivienne said, her voice taking on the commanding tone that had made her a legend in the industry. I need you to explain exactly what your connection to Marcus Reed is, and I need you to explain it now. My company's survival depends on understanding what we're dealing with. Caleb looked at his son, who was watching the adult conversation with the careful attention of a child who had learned that grown-up problems often affected his daily life in unexpected ways. Then he looked at Vivienne, seeing in her desperate determination an echo of his own desperation 5 years ago, when everything he built was crumbling around him. Marcus Reed was my business partner, Caleb said quietly. We built Sentinel systems together. And 5 years ago, he destroyed my life, stole my company, and used my wife's illness against me to force me out of everything I'd worked for. Vivienne's expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching understanding. And now he's trying to destroy my company. No, Caleb replied, his voice heavy with the weight of old wounds and new realizations. He's trying to destroy me. Your company is just collateral damage in a war one thought ended 5 years ago. In the corner, Jude had returned to his drawing, adding new elements that seemed to show pathways of connection between different parts of the network. But now Caleb could see something else in the pattern. A signature, a style of organization that was as distinctive as handwriting. His son hadn't just mapped the attack. He had identified the mind behind it. And somewhere in this building, Marcus Reed's influence was still at work, preparing for the final phase of whatever revenge he had planned. The silence in the conference room stretched taut as a wire. Vivienne sat motionless, processing the implications of Caleb's revelation with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. Outside the glass walls, the normal bustle of corporate life continued, people moving between offices, phones ringing, the steady hum of a company trying to function despite the digital chaos at its heart. Show me, Vivienne said finally, her voice stripped of all emotion. Show me exactly what Marcus Reed did to your company and how it connects to what's happening here. Caleb glanced toward Jude, who had moved to the window again, but was still, clutching his notebook. The boy's ability to sense tension in adult conversations was remarkable, and Caleb could see the subtle signs that his son was becoming overwhelmed by the emotional undercurrents in the room. "The story isn't pretty," Caleb warned, "and it's going to take some time to explain properly." "We have time," Vivienne replied grimly. "The launch isn't for 5 hours, and based on what I'm seeing, we're not going to have a functioning system. By then, anyway." Caleb opened his laptop and pulled up a secure partition where he kept documentation from his legal battles with Marcus. Files he'd hoped never to access again. Evidence of a betrayal that had cost him everything he'd valued except his son. "Sentinel Systems was revolutionary," he began, his fingers moving across the keyboard to display technical specifications and patent applications. "We had developed a new approach to cybersecurity that could adapt in real time to emerging threats. The algorithms I created could learn and evolve, staying ahead of attackers instead of just reacting to them." Vivienne leaned forward, studying the technical diagrams with obvious expertise. "This is similar to what we're trying to achieve with Guardian Protocol." "More than similar," Caleb said quietly. "Guardian Protocol is built on my work. The core, architecture, the adaptive learning systems, even the terminology, it's all evolved from the foundation I laid at Sentinel." "That's impossible." "Marcus Reed was a consultant here for 2 months. He couldn't have." Vivienne stopped, her face paling as the implications became clear. "He could if he had years to develop and refine the stolen technology," Caleb finished. "Marcus didn't just take my company. He took my life's work and has been monetizing it ever since." On his laptop screen, Caleb displayed a timeline of patent filings and corporate acquisitions. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew what to look for. Marcus had systematically taken apart Sentinel Systems innovations and reassembled them under different names, selling the technology to various companies over the past 5 years. Guardian Protocol represents the culmination of that process, Caleb explained. "It's my original vision, finally mature enough for large-scale implementation. And Marcus couldn't let that happen without making sure I knew he was behind it." Jude had returned. To the table, his notebook opened to a fresh page. As his father spoke, the boy began sketching again, but this time his drawing seemed to capture something different, not just technical systems, but the relationships between people and organizations. "Your son is remarkable," Vivienne observed, watching Jude work. "I've never seen anyone process complex information like that." "He sees connections that other people miss," Caleb replied, pride mixing with concern in his voice. "But bringing him into this environment, exposing him to this level of stress and chaos, I'm worried about the impact on him." As if responding to his father's concern, Jude looked up from his drawing and pointed toward the door of the conference room. Through the glass walls, they could see increased activity in the server room, technicians moving with urgent purpose, managers gesturing emphatically at monitors that continued to display system failures. "The situation is getting worse," Vivienne said, following Jude's gaze. "Every minute we're down costs us credibility we can't afford to lose." Caleb's diagnostic programs had been running continuously, and now they chimed with new results. The deeper analysis revealed the true scope of the attack. It wasn't just a system crash, it was a carefully orchestrated dismantling of Crest's entire digital infrastructure. "This is surgical," Caleb muttered, studying the data streams. "Whoever did this knew exactly which systems to target for maximum damage with minimum detectability." "Inside knowledge," Vivienne said grimly. "More than that. This required months of preparation, detailed mapping of your network architecture, and ongoing access to monitor defensive countermeasures." Caleb paused his analysis and looked directly at Vivienne. "Miss Crest, I need to ask you something difficult. How well do you really know David Chun?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Vivienne's expression hardened, and Caleb could see the defensive reflexes of a CEO who had built her company on her ability to judge character and trust key personnel. "David has been with us for 3 years, she replied carefully. "He was instrumental in developing our current security protocols and has overseen millions of dollars in research and development. His work has been exemplary." "But you said he brought Marcus Reed in as a consultant." "That's not unusual. CTOs often recommend consultants based on previous professional relationships." Caleb pulled up another file on his laptop security camera footage from Sentinel Systems, dated 5 years ago. The image showed Marcus Reed and a younger David Chun standing together in a conference room, clearly comfortable with each other's company. David worked for Marcus at Sentinel, Caleb said quietly. He was one of the junior developers on my team, someone I mentored and trusted. When Marcus orchestrated the takeover, David was one of the people who provided inside information about my personal situation, my schedule, my emotional state during Sarah's illness. Vivienne stared at the screen, and Caleb could see her mentally reviewing 3 years of interactions with her CTO, looking for signs she might have missed. You're saying David is working for Marcus? I'm saying David never stopped working for Marcus. His employment here, his rise to CTO, his recommendation to bring Marcus in as a consultant, it's all been part of a long-term plan. In the server room beyond the glass walls, David Chun appeared, moving between workstations with the confident authority of someone overseeing a crisis response. But now, watching him through the lens of Caleb's revelation, his behavior took on a different cast. The way he positioned himself to monitor other people's work, the subtle attention he paid to conversations that weren't directly related to his tasks. Jude had been watching the adults' conversation with growing intensity, and now he held up his notebook to show his latest drawing. The sketch depicted 2 overlapping networks, one representing Crest's legitimate systems, the other showing hidden connections that seemed to burrow through the official architecture like parasites. He's mapped the infiltration, Caleb said, studying his son's work with amazement. Jude, this is extraordinary. You can see the shadow network that's been built inside Crest systems. The drawing showed data pathways that shouldn't exist, communication channels that bypassed normal security protocols, and access points that would allow external control of critical systems. It was a blueprint for corporate espionage, rendered in the visual language of an 8-year-old savant. If this is accurate, Vivienne said, her voice tight with controlled anger, then David has been systematically compromising our security for years. It's more than that, Caleb replied, his diagnostic programs now revealing the full scope of the infiltration. This shadow network isn't just for espionage. It's designed to allow complete external control of your systems. Marcus could shut down Crest's cybersecurity remotely, steal your data, or turn your own security protocols against you. A soft knock on the glass door interrupted their conversation. Janet Mills stood outside, her expression troubled. Miss Crest? I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. David says he's found evidence that the attack came from an external connection, and he's recommending that we lock down all outside access immediately. Caleb and Vivienne exchanged glances. If David succeeded in locking down external access, it would not only prevent any legitimate recovery efforts, it would also eliminate the evidence of his own complicity in the attack. Tell David to wait for my authorization before implementing any lockdown procedures, Vivienne said firmly. After Janet left, Vivienne turned back to Caleb with the expression of someone who had just realized that everything she thought she knew about her company was wrong. If you're right about David, then Marcus Reed has been planning this attack for years. Which means the crash this morning isn't the end goal, it's the beginning of something much worse. Caleb nodded grimly. Marcus doesn't just want to destroy your company, he wants to absorb it. The attack creates a crisis that forces you to accept outside help, probably in the form of a merger or acquisition that puts him in control of Guardian Protocol. And once he has that control, he has everything. My original work, your refinements and improvements, and complete dominance of the cybersecurity market. Jude had been listening to their conversation with the intense focus he brought to complex problems, and now he began a new drawing. This one showed not just the current network architecture, but what appeared to be a solution pathways that could bypass the compromised systems and restore legitimate control. He has an idea, Caleb said, watching his son work. Jude, can you show us how to fix this? The boy looked up from his notebook, his dark eyes meeting his father's with an expression of calm certainty. Then he pointed toward the server room, toward David Chun, and made a gesture that needed no translation. The solution to their problem was going to require confronting the enemy within. The weight of discovery settled over the conference room like a physical presence. Vivienne sat with her hands pressed flat against the polished table, her usually commanding presence subdued by the magnitude of the betrayal she was processing. 3 years of trusting David Chun, 3 years of believing in his loyalty and competence, had been revealed as an elaborate deception. "I need proof," she said finally, her voice carrying the careful control of someone fighting to maintain professional composure. "I can't act against my CTO based on suspicion and old grudges, no matter how compelling your story might be." Caleb understood her position. In the corporate world, accusations without ironclad evidence were career suicide and the wrong move. Now could destroy what was left of her company, even if they ultimately proved Marcus's guilt. "The proof is in the code," he replied, his fingers moving across his laptop keyboard with renewed purpose. "Every programmer has a signature style, ways of organizing logic and commenting code that are as distinctive as handwriting. If David has been implementing Marcus's backdoors, those signatures will be embedded in your system architecture." While Caleb worked, Jude had moved to stand beside his father's chair, watching the scrolling lines of code with the focused attention he usually reserved for his pattern drawings. The boy's presence was comforting, a reminder that some things in life remained pure and uncomplicated even when the adult world revealed new layers of betrayal. "There," Caleb said, highlighting a section of code that controlled access permissions for critical system functions. "This is Marcus's work. The variable naming conventions, the commenting style, even the way the conditional logic is structured, it's identical to code he wrote at Sentinel Systems." Vivienne leaned forward to study the screen, her business background limiting her ability to read the technical details, but her intelligence allowing her to grasp the implications. "You're saying this code was written by Marcus Reed, not David Chun?" "I'm saying this code was written by Marcus and implemented by David. Look at the timestamps. It was added to your system 8 months ago, 6 months after Marcus's consulting contract ended." The evidence was damning, but Caleb knew they needed more than technical proof. They needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy, and more importantly, they needed to stop whatever final phase Marcus had planned for today. His deep scan algorithms had been running continuously, mapping the complete structure of Crest's compromised systems. Now they were beginning to reveal something that made his blood run cold. "Ms. Crest," he said slowly, his voice tight with controlled alarm, "the attack this morning wasn't designed to destroy your systems. It was designed to force you to implement emergency recovery protocols." "What do you mean?" Caleb pulled up a schematic that showed the normal flow of data through Crest's network, then overlaid it with the pathways that would be activated during emergency procedures. The pattern that emerged was like a spider's web, with all the emergency routes leading to a single central point. "Your disaster recovery protocols create a single point of administrative control," he explained. "In a crisis like this, all system authority defaults to whoever has the emergency management credentials." Vivienne's face went pale. "David has those credentials. I gave them to him personally when he became CTO, which means that when you authorize the emergency recovery procedures, you'll be handing complete control of your company's digital infrastructure to someone who's been working for your enemy for 3 years." The implications were staggering. Marcus hadn't just planned to steal Guardian Protocol. He had orchestrated a complete corporate takeover disguised as a rescue operation. David would activate the emergency protocols, ostensibly to save the company, and in doing so would transfer all administrative control to systems that Marcus could manipulate remotely. Jude had been listening to their conversation with growing agitation, his hands moving restlessly over his notebook. Now he began sketching with urgent, almost frantic strokes, creating a drawing that seemed to pulse with kinetic energy. "What is it, buddy?" Caleb asked, recognizing the signs that his son had perceived something the adults had missed. Jude held up his drawing a network diagram that showed not just the current attack, but what appeared to be a secondary assault waiting in reserve. Hidden processes that would activate once the emergency protocols were implemented. Systems that would lock out legitimate administrators and transfer all control to external servers. "He's showing us the second wave," Caleb said, studying the drawing with growing amazement. A morning's crash was just the setup. The real attack happens when David implements the emergency recovery. "When is that scheduled?" Vivienne asked, though the answer was obvious from her expression. "In 2 hours," she replied grimly, "right before the client presentations begin. David recommended we complete the recovery process in time to ensure system stability for the demonstrations." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus had orchestrated a crisis that would force Vivienne to choose between losing her company to system failure or handing it over to the very people who had attacked it. And he had positioned David as the trusted insider who would guide her toward the second option. "We need to move fast," Caleb said, already beginning to formulate a plan. "But first, we need to isolate David without letting him know we've discovered his true role. How do you propose we do that?" Before Caleb could answer, a commotion in the server room caught their attention. Through the glass walls, they could see David Chun speaking animatedly with several technicians, his gestures becoming increasingly emphatic. Even without being able to hear the conversation, it was clear that tensions were rising. Janet Mills appeared at the conference room door again, her expression more troubled than before. "Ms. Crest, David is asking for authorization to implement emergency protocols immediately. He says the system degradation is accelerating, and we're in danger of losing everything if we wait any longer." Vivienne glanced at Caleb, who shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Tell David I need 15 more minutes to review the implications with our insurance provider," Vivienne replied smoothly. "Emergency protocols trigger certain liability clauses that require careful consideration." After Janet left, Vivienne turned back to Caleb with an expression that mixed determination with barely controlled fury. "I've spent 15 years building this company," she said quietly. "I've sacrificed relationships, health, and most of my personal life to create something meaningful in this industry. I will not let Marcus Reed steal it from me through the betrayal of someone I trusted." Caleb recognized the steel in her voice, the same unyielding resolve that had driven him to work 16-hour days building Sentinel systems, the same protective instinct that now guided every decision he made about Jude's welfare. "Then we fight back," he said simply, "but we do it smart. Marcus expects us to either panic or follow David's recommendations. We're going to do neither. What do you propose?" Caleb looked at his son, who was already starting a new drawing, his pencil moving with the confidence of someone who could see solutions where others saw only problems. "We're going to turn Marcus's own strategy against him," Caleb replied. "We're going to give him exactly what he thinks he wants, and then show him why underestimating an autistic 8-year-old and his protective father was the biggest mistake of his career." In the server room, David Chun was checking his watch. With increasing frequency, his body language betraying an anxiety that went beyond professional concern for his company's welfare. Whatever timeline Marcus had established for the final phase of their plan, it was approaching fast, and somewhere. In his elaborate drawings, Jude had already begun to map out their path to victory. The elevator descended into the basement levels of the Crest building, carrying Caleb, Jude, and Vivienne toward what she had described as the legacy server room, a repository of older equipment that predated David Chun's arrival at the company. If Caleb's theory was correct, these older systems might hold the key to understanding exactly how deep Marcus's infiltration had gone. "I haven't been down here in months," Vivienne admitted as the elevator settled with a soft chime. "Most of our current operations run on the cloud infrastructure David designed. These servers are supposed to be just historical backups." The basement level felt different from the sleek corporate environment above. The lighting was harsher, more utilitarian, and the air carried the distinct smell of older electronic equipment ozone and warm metal that spoke of machines that had been running faithfully for years without much attention. Jude immediately perked up as they entered the legacy server room. Where the modern equipment upstairs hummed with quiet efficiency, these older machines had personality. Different colored LED indicators blinked in various patterns. Cooling fans created layers of white noise at different frequencies, and the racks of equipment seemed to tell the story of the company's technological evolution. "He likes it here," Caleb observed, watching his son's face brighten with genuine interest. "It's more honest," Vivienne replied unexpectedly. "These machines do exactly what they're supposed to do, nothing more or less. No hidden protocols or backdoors, just straightforward computing." Caleb began connecting his diagnostic equipment to the legacy systems looking for data that might have been archived before Marcus and David's infiltration began. If he was right, these older backups would show what Crest's original security architecture had looked like before it was compromised. "Tell me about the early days," he said as his programs began their analysis. "When you started the company, what was your vision?" Vivienne settled onto a metal stool beside one of the server racks, and for the first time since they'd met, her corporate facade seemed to relax slightly. "I wanted to build security systems that actually made people safer," she said. "Not just corporate networks, but individuals. Small businesses, schools, people who couldn't afford the kind of protection that big corporations take for granted." As she spoke, Caleb could hear echoes of his own motivations from the Sentinel Systems days. The desire to democratize cybersecurity, to create tools that would level the playing field between attackers and defenders. "David convinced me that we needed to focus on enterprise clients," Vivienne continued. "Higher margins, more predictable revenue streams. He said my original vision was noble, but not commercially viable." "But you never completely abandoned it," Caleb said, watching his diagnostic programs reveal the architecture of Crest's original systems. "These legacy servers are still running protection protocols for smaller clients. A few dozen small businesses. And nonprofits. David keeps suggesting we phase them out to focus resources on Guardian Protocol, but I've resisted. They were my first clients. I can't just abandon them." Jude had found a workstation with an older-style CRT monitor. It's green. Text display reminiscent of computing systems from decades past. He was studying the scrolling logs with intense fascination, his notebook open beside him as he began sketching the patterns he observed. The diagnostic results were revealing, more than Caleb had hoped. The legacy systems showed a clean, elegant architecture that bore no trace of Marcus's signature style. More importantly, they maintained complete logs of all system changes dating back to the company's founding. "There," Caleb said, pointing to a timeline display on his laptop. "This shows every major modification to your security protocols over the past 3 years. Look at the pattern." The graph resembled a heartbeat monitor, with steady, incremental improvements punctuated by sudden spikes of activity that corresponded to David's tenure as CTO. "Each spike represents a major upgrade that David recommended," Caleb explained. "But if you look at the actual code changes, they're not improvements. They're the systematic installation of backdoors and monitoring systems." Vivienne studied the timeline with the focused attention of someone who had built her career on understanding complex systems. "He's been dismantling our security from the inside while making it look like he was strengthening it. More than that, he's been mapping your client base, your financial systems, your research and development. Everything Marcus would need to execute a complete takeover." A soft chime from across the room drew their attention to Jude, who had apparently managed to access some kind of archive system on the vintage workstation. The CRT monitor was now displaying what looked like email logs from several years ago. "Jude, what did you find?" Kayla asked, moving to look over his son's shoulder. The emails were between Vivienne and her original technical team, discussing the philosophical foundations of what would eventually become Guardian Protocol. But they revealed something more. Vivienne's original vision for the system had been remarkably similar to Caleb's work at Sentinel Systems. "You were trying to create adaptive security," Caleb said, reading through the archived conversations. "Systems that could learn and evolve to stay ahead of new threats." "It was theoretical then," Vivienne replied. "We didn't have the computational resources or the algorithmic sophistication to make it work in practice. But you kept developing the idea. Slowly, carefully. David always said we were moving too conservatively, that we needed to be more aggressive about implementation timelines." Caleb's blood chilled as the full scope of Marcus's plan became clear. "He wasn't just stealing my work from Sentinel Systems. He was using your independent research to refine and perfect it. Guardian Protocol isn't just built on stolen technology. It's a fusion of everything both of us created." The elegance of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity. Marcus had positioned David to influence Vivienne's development process, steering her toward solutions that would complement the stolen Sentinel technology. The result was a cybersecurity system more advanced than either original project could have achieved alone. Which means Guardian Protocol really could revolutionize the industry, Vivienne said quietly. And whoever controls, it controls the future of cybersecurity. Jude had continued exploring the archive system, and now he was displaying financial records that showed the gradual shift in Crest's client focus over the past 3 years. The transition from Vivienne's original vision of democratized security to him, David's enterprise-focused strategy, was clearly visible in the revenue streams and contract profiles. He isolated you, Caleb observed, studying the data. David systematically moved you away from smaller clients and community-focused projects. He made you dependent on big corporate contracts that require Guardian Protocol to succeed, so that when he steals the company, it's already structured exactly the way Marcus wants it. Vivienne finished grimly. A new alert chimed on Caleb's laptop. His monitoring programs had detected increased activity in the compromised systems upstairs. David was apparently growing impatient with the delay in implementing emergency protocols. "We're running out of time," Caleb said, "but I think Jude has found something that might help us." His son had moved to a different terminal and was now displaying what appeared to be backup copies of the original Guardian Protocol code versions that predated David's involvement and showed Vivienne's pure vision for adaptive security. "This is clean," Caleb said, studying the archived code. "No backdoors, no hidden access points. Just elegant, powerful security algorithms. Can we use it to bypass David's compromised systems?" "Better than that," Caleb replied, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "We can use it to turn Guardian Protocol against Marcus. His own stolen technology, combined with your original vision, deployed through systems he doesn't know exist." Jude looked up from his exploration of the legacy systems, his dark eyes meeting his father's with an expression of calm understanding. Then he began a new drawing, this one showing pathways that connected the clean legacy systems to the compromised modern infrastructure. "He's designing a bridge," Caleb said, watching his son work. "A way to route legitimate control through the old systems while bypassing David's backdoors entirely." "Is that possible?" Caleb studied Jude's drawing, his mind racing through the technical implications. It was audacious, complex, and exactly the kind of elegant solution that had made him legendary in his Sentinel Systems days. With the right implementation, yes, but it would require perfect timing and flawless execution. One mistake, and we hand Marcus everything he's been working toward. "Then we don't make mistakes," Vivienne said with the quiet determination that had built her company. "We show Marcus Reed what happens when he underestimates people who fight for something they believe in." Above them, the corporate battle was entering its final phase. But here in the basement, surrounded by honest machines and guided by the insights of an 8-year-old savant, they were preparing to launch a counterattack that would redefine the meaning of cybersecurity warfare. The elevator's ascent from the basement felt like traveling between two different worlds, from the honest simplicity of legacy systems to the compromised complexity of modern corporate infrastructure. Caleb carried a portable drive containing clean backup code, while Jude clutched his notebook filled with bridge designs that could revolutionize their understanding of defensive cybersecurity. But as they stepped onto the executive floor, something felt wrong. The usual bustle of crisis management had been replaced by an ominous calm, and the technicians who had been working frantically just an hour ago were nowhere to be seen. "Where is everyone?" Vivienne asked, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone who had learned to trust her instincts. Through the glass walls of the server room, they could see David Chun speaking quietly with 2 men in expensive suits who definitely weren't part of Crest's technical staff. His body language was relaxed, confident, the demeanor of someone whose carefully laid plans were finally coming to fruition. "Miss Crest," Janet Mills appeared from around a corner, her usual professional composure cracked by obvious distress. "I've been looking for you. David implemented the emergency protocols 20 minutes ago. He said you had given verbal authorization and that the delay was becoming critical." The betrayal hit Vivienne like a physical blow. "I gave no such authorization. He said you had called down from the conference room while you were reviewing insurance implications. I didn't think to verify independently." Caleb's laptop chimed with urgent alerts as his monitoring programs detected the activation of the emergency systems. Everything they had feared was now in motion. David had seized administrative control of Crest's entire digital infrastructure. The clients, Vivienne said, her face pale with realization. The demonstration is supposed to begin in 90 minutes. If David controls the systems, he controls the narrative, Caleb finished grimly. Marcus can position himself as the hero who saves Guardian Protocol from a catastrophic failure. Jude had been watching the activity in the server room with unusual intensity, his hands moving restlessly over his notebook. Now he tugged on his father's sleeve and pointed toward one of the monitoring stations where security badge logs were displayed. "What is it, buddy?" Jude opened his notebook to a page that showed a timeline with specific markers, then pointed again at the security display. It took Caleb a moment to understand what his son was showing him, but when the pattern became clear, it changed everything. The badge scanner logs, Caleb breathed, his fingers flying over his laptop keyboard to access the security system. "Jude, you're a genius. What are you looking at?" Vivienne asked, moving to peer over Caleb's shoulder. "The electronic record of everyone who entered and left the building last night," Caleb explained as data populated his screen. If David was here late implementing the final phase of the attack, his badge would have recorded. He stopped mid-sentence, staring at the timestamp data with growing amazement. "Ms. Crest, David Chan's badge shows him leaving the building at 11:47 p.m. last night. But the system logs show critical modifications being made to your security protocols at 2:15 a.m. this morning." "Someone else was here," Vivienne said, understanding the implications immediately. "Not someone else. The same person, but using a different badge." Caleb pulled up more detailed logs, cross-referencing badge access with security camera footage. "Look at this. At 2:10 a.m., a badge registered to Sarah Kim was used to access the server room. But Sarah left the company 6 months ago. Her badge should have been deactivated. It was deactivated. But someone with administrative privileges reactivated it for exactly 45 minutes last night." Caleb highlighted the relevant entries with growing excitement. Long enough to implement the final attack code and then deactivate it again to cover their tracks. The security camera footage was grainy, but clear enough to show a figure moving through the server room during the early morning hours. The person's face was hidden by the strategic positioning of equipment and careful avoidance of direct camera angles, but their movements showed intimate familiarity with the facility layout. David knew exactly where the cameras were positioned, Vivienne observed. "More than that," Caleb said, advancing the footage frame by frame. "Look at the timestamp on this image versus the badge log entry. There's a discrepancy of nearly 30 seconds. Jude had been following their analysis with intense focus, and now he began sketching rapidly, creating a diagram that seemed to map the movement patterns from the security footage. "He's showing us the route," Caleb said, watching his son work. "But look at this detail. The way the person moves around the server racks isn't efficient for someone working alone. It's the pattern of someone who's coordinating with another person. Someone who is already inside the building," Vivienne said quietly. The full scope of the betrayal was becoming clear. David hadn't been working alone during the attack. Someone else with legitimate access had been coordinating the assault from inside the building, while David used Sarah Kim's reactivated badge to implement the final code. "We need to see who else was in the building during those critical 45 minutes," Caleb said, expanding his search of the badge logs. The results were devastating. Only 3 badges had been active in the building between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. David Chun's reactivated entry as Sarah Kim, a cleaning crew badge for the lower floors, and one other entry that made Vivienne's face go white with shock. "Patricia Williams," she whispered, "my head of security." The badge log showed Patricia's legitimate access to the security office during the exact time frame when the final attack code was being implemented. More damning, her access continued for an additional 2 hours after David's illicit entry ended, time that would have been used to modify security camera footage and adjust electronic logs to minimize evidence of the conspiracy. "Patricia has been with me since the company's 2nd year," Vivienne said, her voice hollow with betrayal. "I trusted her with everything: financial records, personnel files, client information. She has access to systems that even David doesn't know about. Caleb's mind raced through the implications. If Patricia Williams had been compromised, then Marcus's infiltration of Crest cybersecurity was even more complete than they had realized. The head of security would have detailed knowledge of every defensive protocol, every backup system, every contingency plan. The legacy servers, Caleb said suddenly. Patricia would know about them. She would have told Marcus about the clean backup systems we just discovered, which means our counterattack strategy is already compromised. Vivienne finished in the server room. David Chun was now speaking with obvious animation to his mysterious visitors. Through the glass, they could see him gesturing toward displays, showing the successfully implemented emergency protocols. Whatever final phase Marcus had planned, it was clearly proceeding on schedule. Jude had been listening to their conversation with growing agitation, his hands moving more rapidly over his notebook. Now he looked up with an expression of urgent determination and began pointing toward different areas of the building, the executive offices, the security center, the main server room. He's mapping their positions, Caleb realized. Jude, can you see where everyone is right now? His son nodded and began a new drawing, this one showing the building's layout with figures positioned in various locations. The diagram revealed something that made Caleb's blood run cold. They're not just controlling the systems, he said, studying Jude's sketch. They're controlling the building. Look at these positions. They have people stationed at all the critical access points. Lockdown, Vivienne breathed. They're going to trap us here. As if summoned by their realization, the building's public address system crackled to life with David Chun's voice. Attention all Crest cybersecurity personnel. Due to the ongoing security crisis, we are implementing Level 5 lockdown protocols. All personnel are to remain in their current locations until the emergency response team can verify the integrity of our systems. Thank you for your cooperation during this difficult time. The announcement was followed by the distinctive sound of electronic locks engaging throughout the building. They were no longer just fighting for control of computer systems. They were fighting for their freedom. And somewhere in his notebook, Jude was already sketching what looked like an escape plan that would turn the building's own security systems against the people who thought they controlled them. The lockdown announcement echoed through the empty corridors of Crest. Cybersecurity as electronic systems throughout the building shifted into fortress mode. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the executive floor, and the familiar hum of climate control systems had changed to the deeper, more urgent sound of crisis protocols engaging. Caleb felt Jude press closer to his side, the boy's heightened sensitivity to environmental changes, making the building's transformation particularly overwhelming. The familiar had become alien, safe spaces had become prison cells, and the very systems designed to protect were now weapons in the hands of their enemies. How long before the client presentations? Caleb asked, checking his watch against the timeline of Marcus's plan. 45 minutes, Vivienne replied, her voice tight with controlled desperation. The board members will start arriving in 20 minutes, expecting to see Guardian Protocol's triumphant debut. Through the glass walls of the conference room, they could see David Chun moving with practiced efficiency between workstations in the server room. His two companions, who Caleb now realized must be Marcus's technical specialists, were connecting additional equipment to Crest's core systems. They're not just stealing Guardian Protocol, Caleb observed, watching the activity with growing alarm. They're preparing to demonstrate it as if they developed it themselves. A live hijacking of our own product launch, Vivienne said bitterly. Marcus gets to present our life's work to our clients, while positioning himself as the hero who saved the company from catastrophic failure. Jude had spread his notebook open across the conference table and was working with intense focus, creating what appeared to be a master diagram that integrated all of his previous observations. The drawing showed the building's architecture, the network topology, the positions of the various conspirators, and something else pathways that seemed to flow between different systems like digital rivers. He's designing a counter-protocol, Caleb said, studying his son's work with growing amazement. Jude, this is extraordinary. You're mapping a way to use their own lockdown systems against them. The boy looked up from his drawing with an expression of calm certainty and pointed toward the building's security office. His meaning was clear: their path to victory led through the very systems Patricia Williams thought she controlled. The security office has manual overrides for the lockdown protocols, Vivienne explained. But Patricia will be there, and it's the most heavily monitored location in the building. Not if we approach it from the right direction, Caleb replied, his mind racing through the implications of Jude's design. Your son has identified something I've never seen before: a way to use the building's own security cameras and sensors as processing nodes for a distributed algorithm. He connected his laptop to the conference room's presentation system, projecting Jude's drawings onto the large wall display. The patterns that had seemed like abstract art now revealed themselves as sophisticated system diagrams that mapped every electronic component in the building. Traditional cybersecurity focuses on defending individual systems, Caleb explained as he began translating Jude's visual language into executable code. But Jude is showing us how to turn the entire building into a single, adaptive security system that can identify and isolate threats automatically, including the threats that think they're in control, Vivienne said, understanding dawning in her voice. Working together, father and son began implementing what Jude's drawings showed them. Caleb's hands moved across the keyboard with the fluid confidence of his Sentinel Systems days, while Jude continued to refine his diagrams, adding details that revealed new layers of the solution. The algorithm taking shape on Caleb's screen was unlike anything he had ever created. It used pattern recognition to identify normal versus abnormal behavior throughout the building's systems, then adapted in real time to contain and neutralize detected threats. It was Guardian Protocol's adaptive security concept applied not just to network infrastructure, but to physical space itself. This is what Marcus really stole, Caleb said quietly, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. Not just my original algorithms, but the fundamental insight that security systems need to be alive, responsive, capable of learning and growth. And now we're giving that insight back to the systems he thinks he controls, Vivienne replied. As they worked, the sounds of activity from the server room grew more urgent. David's voice could be heard giving instructions to his technical team, preparing for the final phase of their takeover. Through the building's security monitors, they could see Marcus Reed's limousine pulling into the executive parking garage. He's here, Vivienne said, her voice carrying the weight of years of professional rivalry and personal betrayal. Marcus has come to claim his prize in person. Jude had been monitoring their progress with increasing agitation, his usual calm demeanor giving way to something approaching urgency. Now he began a new drawing, this one showing temporal relationships timelines that converged at a single critical moment. 15 minutes, Caleb interpreted, looking at his son's latest sketch. We have 15 minutes to implement the counter-protocol before the client presentations begin, and Marcus seizes control permanently. The algorithm was complete, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. But implementing it required accessing systems that were now under David and Patricia's control, threading their counterattack through the very networks that had been compromised by years of insider sabotage. I need to get to the security office, Caleb said, saving the final code to his portable drive. The algorithm needs to be uploaded directly to the building's central monitoring system. That's suicide, Vivienne protested. Patricia will be there with whatever security team Marcus brought with him. Not if they think I'm still trapped in here with you. Caleb looked at his son, seeing in Jude's dark eyes the same determination that had carried them through 5 years of rebuilding their lives after Sarah's death. The boy nodded slightly, understanding what his father was asking of him. Jude is going to stay here and guide the implementation remotely, Caleb explained. His drawings show pathways through the system that I would never see on my own. While I'm uploading the algorithm, he'll be adjusting it in real time to respond to whatever countermeasures they deploy. A father-son team attacking a multinational. Conspiracy from inside their own stronghold, Vivienne said with something approaching admiration. Marcus Reed has no idea what kind of enemy he's created. The conference room's wall display flickered as external systems attempted to override their local control. David's team was clearly trying to cut off their access to building systems, but Jude's counter-protocol was already beginning to adapt, finding alternative pathways through networks they didn't know existed. "The cleaning crew," Jude said suddenly, his voice soft but clear. It was the first time he had spoken since the lockdown began, and both adults turned to look at him with surprise. He pointed to his latest drawing, which showed maintenance passages and service corridors that ran parallel to the main building. Systems. The cleaning crew's access badges would allow movement through areas that David and Patricia couldn't monitor from the security office. "He's right," Vivienne said, studying the building schematics with new understanding. "The maintenance corridors have independent power and communication systems. They were designed to function even during security lockdowns." Caleb gathered his equipment, preparing for what might be his final confrontation with the man who had destroyed his first life and was now threatening to destroy his second. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. This time, he had Jude's extraordinary mind mapping the battlefield, Vivienne's fierce determination supporting their cause, and 5 years of hard-won wisdom about what really mattered in life. "When this is over," Vivienne said as Caleb prepared to leave, "I want to offer you both something more than just a job. I want to rebuild this company around the values that brought us together today: honesty, innovation, and the recognition that real security comes from protecting people, not just systems." Through the conference room windows, they could see the first of the client limousines arriving in the parking garage. Board members, government representatives, and corporate executives coming to witness what they believed would be Guardian Protocol's triumphant debut. Instead, they were about to see Marcus Reed learn that some betrayals create enemies more dangerous than any algorithm he could steal or conspiracy he could orchestrate. In the corner of the conference room, Jude began his final drawing, a master algorithm, rendered in the visual language that only he could create, showing the precise moment when truth would overcome deception and a father's love would prove stronger than a traitor's greed. The maintenance corridors beneath Crest Cybersecurity were a hidden world of concrete passages and bundled cables, lit by harsh fluorescent strips that cast everything in stark relief. Caleb moved through them with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years navigating the forgotten spaces where technology lived: server rooms, cable conduits, the unglamorous infrastructure that made the digital world possible. His portable drive contained Jude's master algorithm, translated into executable code that would turn the building's own systems against the conspirators who thought they controlled them. But first, he had to reach the security office without triggering the sensors that Patricia Williams was monitoring from her command center. The cleaning crew badge he'd borrowed from a supply closet gave him access to service areas that existed outside the normal security grid. These passages had been designed for maintenance workers who needed to move through the building without disrupting business operations, and they offered exactly the invisibility he needed. Through his earpiece, he could hear Jude's soft voice, providing guidance, the boy somehow able to track his father's progress through the building's sensor network, despite the sophisticated countermeasures David's team had deployed. "Left corridor, 30 steps, then vertical access," Jude whispered, his words carrying the calm precision of someone who could see patterns that others missed. The security office was located on the 35th floor, strategically positioned to monitor all building systems while remaining isolated from potential threats. Caleb had studied its layout during their planning phase, but approaching it through maintenance corridors required navigating a 3-dimensional maze of pipes, ducts, and cable runs above him. He could hear the muffled sounds of the client presentation beginning in the executive conference room. Marcus Reed's voice carried through the building's ventilation system, smooth and confident, as he began what was supposed to be his moment of triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us during this challenging time. I'm pleased to report that despite the serious security breach that threatened Guardian Protocol this morning, our emergency response team has successfully restored full system functionality." Caleb reached the access point that would take him into the security office's server room. The algorithm on his portable drive was ready for deployment, but uploading it would require a direct connection to the building's central monitoring system, a process that would take at least 3 minutes and would immediately alert Patricia to his presence. "Implementation beginning," he whispered into his earpiece. "Countervirus ready," came Jude's reply. the boy's voice carrying an odd mixture of childlike clarity and technical precision. Caleb connected his portable drive to the central server and began the upload process. Immediately, alarms began chiming in the security office as Patricia's monitoring systems detected unauthorized access to critical infrastructure. But something remarkable was happening on the screens around him. As Jude's algorithm spread through the building's networks, it wasn't behaving like traditional code. Instead, it moved like a living organism, adapting to each system it encountered and learning from the defensive countermeasures that David's team deployed against it. The countervirus, for that's what Jude had created, though he had no formal training in cybersecurity theory, was beautiful in its elegant simplicity. Where traditional security systems tried to block threats, Jude's algorithm absorbed them, analyzed their structure, and then used that knowledge to strengthen the building's overall defenses. What the hell is happening? Patricia Williams' voice echoed through the security office as she rushed in from an adjacent room. Her face flushed with alarm as she saw cascading status changes across her monitoring displays. Caleb looked up from his laptop to see the woman who had betrayed Vivienne's trust standing in the doorway, her hand moving toward the panic button that would summon Marcus's security team. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Caleb said quietly, gesturing toward the screens that showed the countervirus spreading through systems she had thought were under her control. "Your panic button runs through the same networks that my son just turned against you." Patricia's face went white as she realized the implications. The building's security systems were no longer responding to her commands. They were responding to the elegant logic of an 8-year-old boy who saw patterns where others saw only chaos. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," Patricia said, her voice carrying the desperate edge of someone whose carefully laid plans were crumbling around her. "Marcus Reed is offering Vivienne a partnership that will save her company. Without his backing, Crest Cybersecurity will be bankrupt within 6 months. And with his backing, it will be absorbed into his empire, and Vivienne will be nothing more than a figurehead for technology she helped create," Caleb replied, continuing to monitor the algorithm's progress across his laptop screen. The countervirus had reached the main server room, where David Chun was attempting to coordinate resistance against the spreading intrusion. But traditional cybersecurity defenses were useless against Jude's creation because it didn't attack systems. It healed them, removing the backdoors and hidden access points that had been installed over 3 years of careful sabotage. "Guardian protocol is based on stolen technology anyway," Patricia said, desperation making her reckless with information. "Marcus owns the fundamental patents. He's just reclaiming what was always his. Those patents were stolen from me 5 years ago," Caleb replied calmly. "And the adaptive learning algorithms that make Guardian protocol revolutionary were developed by Vivienne independently. Marcus has no legal claim to any of it." Through his earpiece, he could hear Jude's voice providing updates on the algorithm's progress. The boy was monitoring dozens of system nodes simultaneously, adjusting the countervirus's behavior in real time to respond to new countermeasures that David's team kept deploying. But something in Jude's voice had changed. The usual calm certainty was being replaced by stress indicators that Caleb recognized from previous episodes when his son had been pushed beyond his processing limits. "Status report, buddy," Caleb said softly into his microphone. "Too many patterns," Jude replied, his voice strained with the effort of managing information flows that would overwhelm most adult experts. "They're changing too fast." The countervirus was working exactly as designed, but the sheer complexity of coordinating its deployment across the building's interconnected systems was pushing Jude towards sensory overload. And if the boy couldn't maintain focus, the algorithm would lose its adaptive edge, and David's team would regain control. "Patricia," Caleb said, turning toward the security chief with an expression that carried 5 years of hard-won understanding about what really mattered in life. "You have a choice to make. You can continue supporting Marcus Reed's conspiracy and watch an 8-year-old boy suffer for the sake of corporate greed. Or you can help me stabilize these systems so that a remarkable child doesn't pay the price for adult betrayals." For a moment, Patricia Williams stood frozen in the doorway of her own security office, watching displays that showed her life's work being systematically dismantled by the most elegant piece of code she had ever encountered. Then she moved to a workstation and began typing commands that would support rather than resist the countervirus's spread. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she said quietly, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Marcus promised that Vivienne would be protected, that the merger would be presented as a rescue rather than a takeover. "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him." Crest's cybersecurity was struggling financially, and Marcus's backing seemed like the only way to ensure everyone kept their jobs. Together, they worked to guide the countervirus through the final phases of its deployment. Patricia's knowledge of the building's systems, combined with Caleb's understanding of Jude's visual logic, created a coordination that allowed the algorithm to complete its mission without overwhelming the boy who had created it. On the screens around them, they could see David Chun's desperate attempts to regain control of the systems that had defined his power within the company. But the countervirus had done more than remove his backdoors. It had revealed the full scope of his sabotage, creating an unalterable record of 3 years of betrayal that would stand as evidence in any legal proceeding. "It's done," Caleb said, watching the final status indicators turn green as Jude's algorithm established complete control over the building's networks. "The countervirus has healed every compromised system and isolated all unauthorized access points." Through the building's public address system, they could hear Marcus Reed's voice becoming increasingly strained as his presentation was interrupted by system alerts that he couldn't understand or control. The war for Guardian Protocol was entering its final phase, and for the first time in 5 years, Caleb felt confident that justice would triumph over betrayal. The executive conference room had become a theater of corporate warfare, with Marcus Reed standing at the head of the polished table, while representatives from 15 major corporations and 3 government agencies watched his carefully orchestrated presentation dissolve into chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," Marcus said, his legendary composure beginning to crack as system alerts cascaded across the presentation screens behind him. "We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties that will be resolved momentarily." But through the building's internal communication system, Vivienne Crest's voice cut through his reassurances with surgical precision. "What you're experiencing, Mr. Reed, is the complete restoration of systems that you and your conspirators have been sabotaging for 3 years." Marcus's face went pale as he realized that his carefully maintained facade was crumbling in front of the very clients he had intended to impress. The board members and government representatives began exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to suspicion. In the conference room where Jude waited with Vivienne, the boy had moved beyond the stress that had threatened to overwhelm him during the countervirus deployment. Now he was working with the focused calm of someone who could see the final solution to a complex problem. His latest drawing showed not just system architecture, but something deeper, the mathematical relationships that governed how trust and betrayal propagated through human networks, just as viruses propagated through digital ones. "He's designing the restoration key," Vivienne said, watching Jude work with growing amazement. "A way to not just heal the compromised systems, but to make them stronger than they were before the attack." Through his earpiece, Caleb could hear his son's voice, providing final guidance for the algorithm's deployment. But now Jude's words carried something new, not just technical precision, but the kind of quiet confidence that comes from understanding one's own extraordinary gifts. "Implementation complete, Dad. Systems ready for restoration key. Deploy it, buddy." What happened next was unlike anything the corporate world had ever witnessed. The restoration key spread through Crest's networks like digital antibodies, not just removing the malicious code that Marcus's team had installed, but using that code structure to strengthen the company's defenses against future attacks. Every backdoor became a monitoring point that would detect similar intrusions. Every hidden access point became a honeypot that would trap unauthorized users. Every compromised system became more secure than it had been before the sabotage began. "This is impossible," David Chun's voice echoed through the building's communication system as he watched his 3 years of careful infiltration work being turned against itself. "The security protocols I implemented are based on the most advanced algorithms available." "The algorithms you stole," Vivienne replied through the intercom, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had finally understood the full scope of the betrayal she had endured, and which you never truly understood. In the executive conference room, Marcus Reed was facing the collapse of everything he had worked toward. The clients he had intended to impress were now witnessing the revelation of his conspiracy in real time, as the building's displays showed unalterable evidence of the sabotage that had been conducted under his direction. "This is a misunderstanding," Marcus said, his voice taking on the desperate edge of someone whose carefully constructed lies were being exposed. "David Shun has been operating without my knowledge or authorization. I came here today to help Crest's cybersecurity recover from what I believed was an external attack. But the restoration key had done more than heal compromised systems. It had recovered archived communications that showed the full scope of coordination between Marcus, David, and Patricia. Email exchanges, financial transfers, technical specifications shared across supposedly secure channels." "Mr. Reed," said Dr. Sarah Chun, the lead representative from the Department of Homeland Security, "I think it would be best if you remained here while we sort through these revelations. Guardian Protocol was being evaluated for implementation across critical infrastructure, and if what we're seeing is accurate, this represents a serious breach of national security protocols." Marcus's legendary composure finally shattered completely. The man who had built his career on manipulating others through charm and strategic deception was trapped in a building where every system now responded to the will of an 8-year-old boy who saw truth in patterns that adults missed. "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice rising with desperation. "Everything I did was necessary to prevent the waste of revolutionary technology. Caleb Dawson was never capable of bringing his innovations to market. I saved his work from obscurity by destroying his life and stealing his company." Vivienne's voice cut through the conference room with the precision of someone who had finally found her voice after years of being manipulated. In the security office, Caleb was watching the final phase of the restoration process with Patricia Williams, who had become an unlikely ally in the effort to expose the conspiracy she had helped enable. "I've never seen anything like this," Patricia said, studying the displays that showed the restoration key's elegant work. "It's not just fixing the problems, it's learning from them, becoming stronger through the process of healing." "That's what my son taught me," Caleb replied quietly. "That sometimes the things that challenge us most can become the sources of our greatest strength." The restoration key had completed its work throughout the building systems, but Jude's algorithm had achieved something more profound than technical success. It had created a new model for cybersecurity that treated attacks not as external threats to be repelled, but as opportunities for growth and adaptation. "Guardian Protocol is ready for deployment." Jude's voice came through the earpiece, carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had solved a problem that had puzzled adult experts for years. "More than ready," Caleb replied, looking at the displays that showed systems operating at efficiency levels that exceeded their original specifications. "It's evolved." In the executive conference room, the government representatives were already making phone calls to coordinate the arrest of Marcus Reed and his conspirators. The corporate clients, initially confused by the morning's revelations, were now asking detailed questions about licensing rights for technology that had proven its worth under the most challenging possible circumstances. And in her conference room, Vivienne Crest was looking at Jude's final drawing as a representation of the restored company that showed not just healed systems, but transformed relationships between people who had learned to value truth over manipulation, collaboration over competition. "Your son has given us more than just a solution to our technical problems," she said to Caleb through the communication system. "He's shown us a new way of thinking about security, trust, and what it means to build something that lasts." The war for Guardian Protocol was over, but the victory belonged not to the corporate warriors who had fought for control of stolen technology, but to a father and son who had discovered that the strongest security comes from connections built on honesty, understanding, and the recognition that extraordinary gifts can emerge from the most unexpected places. 6 months later, the morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Caleb's new office on the 38th floor of the Crest building, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floor that reminded him of Jude's drawings. The boy sat at a specially designed workstation in the corner, surrounded by notebooks filled with architectural diagrams for what they now called the Adaptive Security Institute. The transformation of Crest's cybersecurity had been as dramatic as Jude's restoration algorithm had been elegant. What had begun as a desperate effort to save a single company had evolved into something far more significant, a new approach to cybersecurity that treated digital networks as living ecosystems, capable of growth, learning, and self-healing. "The partnership agreement is ready for your review," Vivienne said, entering the office with the kind of relaxed confidence that had replaced her old corporate armor. "Though I have to say, calling it a partnership doesn't quite capture what we've built here." She was right. The document on Caleb's desk represented something unprecedented in the corporate world. An equal collaboration between two visionaries who had learned that the strongest foundations were built on mutual respect rather than competitive advantage. Crest Dawson Adaptive Systems bore both their names, but more importantly, it embodied both their values. Vivienne's drive for excellence and market leadership balanced with Caleb's commitment to making technology serve human needs. The company's mission statement, written in Jude's visual language and translated into corporate prose, committed them to democratizing cybersecurity while advancing the state of the art. The Department of Homeland Security wants to expand the pilot program to 50 additional installations. Vivienne continued, settling into the chair across from Caleb's desk. And the European Union is asking about licensing rights for their critical infrastructure protection initiative. The success had been beyond anything either of them had imagined. Guardian Protocol, enhanced by Jude's adaptive algorithms, hadn't just proven itself during the crisis. It had redefined what cybersecurity could accomplish. Systems protected by their technology didn't just resist attacks. They learned from them, becoming stronger and more sophisticated with each challenge they faced. But the real transformation had been in the people involved. Marcus Reed was serving a 15-year sentence for corporate espionage and conspiracy, his empire dismantled by investigators who had used Jude's restoration key as a roadmap to uncover decades of stolen intellectual property. David Chun had accepted a plea agreement that required him to provide testimony about the full scope of the conspiracy, while Patricia Williams had become one of their most effective advocates for ethical cybersecurity practices. "There's something else," Vivienne said, her expression taking on the careful neutrality she used when approaching sensitive subjects. "The board has approved the expansion of the neurodiversity program. We're ready to hire 12 additional consultants who bring different cognitive perspectives to complex problems." It had been Jude's idea, expressed through drawings that showed how teams with varied thinking styles could solve problems that stumped more conventional approaches. The program had started with a single intern, a young woman with Asperger's syndrome who saw data flows as musical compositions, and had quickly proven that cognitive diversity wasn't just socially responsible, it was strategically advantageous. "Jude wants to show you the latest design," Caleb said, gesturing toward his son, who had been following their conversation with the focused attention he brought to all complex systems. The boy approached with his newest notebook, this one filled with architectural plans for physical spaces that would support neurodiverse work styles. Quiet zones for people who needed to process information without sensory overload, collaboration. Areas designed to accommodate different communication preferences, and technology interfaces that adapted to individual cognitive patterns. "He's designing the headquarters for our Seattle expansion," Caleb explained, as Vivienne studied the drawings with growing admiration. "A building that functions like one of his adaptive algorithms responsive to the needs of the people who work there?" The Seattle office represented more than geographic expansion. It was a return to the Pacific Northwest, where Caleb had grown up, and where he and Jude could build new connections with extended family they had barely seen during the difficult years after Sarah's death. "The investors are impressed with the preliminary designs," Vivienne said, understanding the deeper significance of what Jude had created. "But they're even more impressed with the productivity metrics from our neurodiverse teams. Turns out that people who think differently don't just solve different problems, they solve the same problems better." As if summoned by their conversation, Mrs. Chun appeared in the doorway of the office, no longer just Jude's caregiver, but now the coordinator of the company's family support services. The program she had helped design provided childcare, educational support, and family counseling for employees, recognizing that people did their best work when they didn't have to choose between professional success and personal responsibilities. "Jude, your afternoon tutorial group is ready," she said with a warm smile that had made her an integral part of their extended family. "3 new students today, all eager to learn your visual programming techniques." The tutorial program had emerged organically from Jude's natural teaching instincts. What had started as informal sessions where he shared his pattern recognition techniques with curious colleagues had evolved into a formal curriculum that was being adopted by computer science programs across the country. Jude gathered his notebooks and moved toward the door, but paused to look back at his father with an expression of quiet satisfaction. The transformation from the isolated boy who had accompanied him to a corporate crisis 6 months ago was remarkable, not because Jude had changed, but because he had finally found an environment that appreciated his extraordinary gifts. "I'll see you at home tonight, buddy," Caleb said. "Mrs. Chun is making that stir-fry you like." After they left, Caleb and Vivienne stood at the window, looking out over a city that was slowly adopting their adaptive security technologies. Traffic management systems that learned from congestion patterns, power grids that optimized themselves in real time, communication networks that became more resilient with each attempted intrusion. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Marcus had succeeded?" Vivienne asked. "He couldn't have succeeded," Caleb replied with quiet certainty. His entire approach was based on taking rather than creating, on controlling rather than collaborating. That kind of thinking can achieve short-term victories, but it can't sustain itself over time. And ours can? Caleb looked back toward the corner where Jude had been working, at the notebooks filled with visions of a future where technology served human flourishing rather than corporate dominance. Our approach is based on growth through connection, strength through diversity, and security through understanding. Those aren't just business principles, they're life principles. And they're what Jude has been trying to teach us all along. The partnership agreement lay on Caleb's desk, formally documenting what they had built together. But the real agreement was deeper than any legal document could, capture a commitment to continuing the work that had brought them together, guided by the insights of a remarkable boy who saw patterns where others saw chaos. As the afternoon sun shifted across the office floor, creating new geometric patterns that would inspire Jude's next drawings, Caleb felt a deep gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. The crisis that had threatened to destroy Vivienne's company had instead revealed the foundation for something much larger, a new way of thinking about security, trust, and the extraordinary potential that emerges when people with different gifts choose to work together. The war for Guardian Protocol was over, but the work of building a more secure and inclusive digital future was just beginning. And somewhere in his notebooks, Jude was already sketching the next phase of their shared adventure.